Well, hello and welcome back to the Melbourne Catholic website. Always wonderful to have such an interesting array of guests to be able to talk to from time to time. We're here this time as part of the Hearing, Healing, Hope conference running in Melbourne, and as you see this, the conference will have closed, but we're talking to two of the very important people who'll be presenting here at the conference. It's run by Catholic Social Services Australia. Firstly, Peter Selwood, who's the Executive Director of CentreCare in Brisbane. Welcome, Peter.
Nice to be here, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And also Chris Hall, who's CEO of Mercy Care WA.
Thank you very
much. And Chris, lovely to have you with us.
Thank you.
So we'll start in Perth, if we may. Tell us about your work at Mercy Care WA.
Well, Mercy Care is a large organisation established by the Sisters of Mercy some 150 years ago, and we have a range of health, aged care, community and disability services across the state, working in partnership with a range of other not-for-profit organisations and Catholic charities.
Okay, and as we hear the name Mercy Care, I assume relatively similarly in other states?
Well, we're separate.
Right, okay, so explain that to us.
Mercy Care is an organisation within the church that has its own status in the diocese of, well, the Archdiocese of Perth.
Of Perth, yeah. Okay. And I want to get onto the Catholic Housing Alliance if I can in a moment, but let's just talk to Peter first. CentreCare Brisbane, and we know the CentreCare name around Australia. I think it morphed into Catholic Care possibly here in Melbourne some time ago, but tell us a little bit about your work.
Okay, so the Archdiocese of Brisbane, which is southeast Queensland, a large part of the country, growing population, a significant population, and we, a bit like Chris, disability services, some community aged care, childcare, family services, so that they're taking us into spaces like domestic violence at the moment, which is a big issue in our part of the world. I think it's a big issue everywhere, to be honest. And trying to find our way through the National Disability Insurance Scheme as well. So there's lots happening in our space.
A nice little challenge there.
It's significant, yeah, absolutely.
So look, the Catholic Housing Alliance, and I know you've both had involvement there. Can you just, firstly, Chris, maybe tell us about what it is and then what it does?
No, happy to do that. The alliance was really formed in response. Look, we know a couple of things. One is the real estate market. The Australian real estate market is really out of touch for many people in the community, particularly on those on low incomes or limited incomes. That's the first thing. The second is that we know that there's massive waiting lists for social housing in this country. I think the latest figure that I saw from 2015 was in excess of 200,000 people.
It's a massive number.
Just on that waiting list. We know that there's well in excess of 100,000 people that are homeless each night in this country. And we also know that many of the Catholic social service organisations across the country are involved in providing accommodation and accommodation support services for people that are homeless or potentially at risk of homelessness or that are exiting crisis accommodation type services. So the various Catholic providers came together at a national level to form what we now call the Australian Catholic Housing Alliance. And that is really just a network of Catholic social service organisations that are involved in either or both the capital side of accommodation, of building housing for people that require low-cost housing or that are homeless, or in providing support services to people accessing those services. So we came together a couple of years ago and formed this alliance. It's been auspiced by Catholic Social Services Australia and by Catholic Health Australia, and we thought it was really important to have those two national bodies that are very involved in the advocacy front on the national level, as in effect our sponsors. But the network brings together a number of Catholic organisations from across the country involved in those services. So we're working, the whole purpose really is that it's an informal network, and we're learning from each other, and sharing our learnings about the provision of housing, and housing support services. And in that context, it's a great forum for people to,
I can imagine.
to share their learnings and what's going on in various places.
So I suppose you've half answered one question I had, which was, and Peter, chime in as well if you'd like to, was it difficult to get some cohesion when you are bringing together so many separate bodies, although, as you explained, you did bring in the two umbrella bodies. But was that cohesion difficult at first?
Look, yeah, it's a network. So it's been formed from the grassroots up. So the organisations that are there and the representatives of those organisations want to be there. So nobody's forcing us to come together.
Sure.
And we're seeing the benefits of that shared learnings and shared knowledge. And also looking at how we can work together to bring about how we can best utilise all of our resources, services. We've got thousands of staff involved in these areas and volunteers, and it's about how we bring all that together in a more coordinated way across the country. I think there's two other components, Sean. One is we are working with Catholic Social Services Australia around the whole policy area for housing in this country. We're aware that more and more governments are pulling out of direct support for these areas. The Church has a critical role to perform in this and has for many decades provided some very significant services to people that are doing it tough out there. Again, either in providing the accommodation and or providing the supports around that accommodation. And we're also aware that the Church itself has resources and land and buildings, and part of our coming together is to make representation to the Church about how we can better utilise some of the assets that the Church has at its disposal.
Excellent.
And the bishops have been very supportive and responsive to that to date. And part of being here in Melbourne over the last week has been very much about how we can learn further and what we can do to get additional support for the sorts of initiatives that our organisations are involved in.
That's an excellent understanding, Chris. Thank you. Peter, from your perspective, we've heard a great explanation there from Chris. Maybe your perspective, and also maybe a little bit digging into the grassroots to try and let our people who are watching here, who don't know much about this, give us a practical example of how it might work.
In every aspect of our work, housing and accommodation is important. In fact, it's critical. So it's domestic violence. The first thing you need to find is somewhere for people who are impacted by that to live. Disability services is also critical. Housing's important. And part of the solution and part of the provision of good quality care for people and support is to find somewhere where they can live and feel like it's home. And there's too many people not experiencing that. And as Chris said, homelessness is, we all understand that, it's a crisis, but there's other issues around housing. And the Church brings great infrastructure to this process, not just the property, but the people. We have communities that can reach out to people. We need to find ways to engage our communities to make sure they're responding to what's going on in their space. So I think this is an enormous opportunity for us.
I couldn't agree more. Can it be as simple as getting a knock on the door of CentreCare and a mother has had a shocking night, the father's gone? I'm giving you a pretty typical standardised version. Kids haven't got nowhere to sleep. How do you actually take up the running and try and do something there?
It's challenging because you simply can't just have a doorway for people to walk into. You need to have practitioners who can work with families. The crisis is more than just somewhere to live. That's a critical part of it, and that's a solution to start with. Then there's all the supports that need to be around. So in Brisbane, we're working on a partnership at the moment with St Vincent de Paul, where they're providing us with up to about 5 houses for families in crisis to move into for up to a year, and then we will provide the support to them, the personal assistance. While they're there.
Excellent.
So that's been a fantastic initiative. We're really excited about that, and we think it can grow. And St Vincent de Paul nationally are fantastic in the housing space, and they're doing great work in New South Wales. Chris would know more about that than I do, but they're working with government to be able to provide housing in communities, and we often focus on the urban communities, but rural and regional communities are suffering from the same challenge around housing and accommodation. So what we've got to do is then drag government into the game, because they have withdrawn, and it's true what Chris says about that, but we've got to show some initiative and say, look, what we're doing, come and help us make it happen.
And therefore advocacy becomes critical.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Hearing, Healing, Hope was the name of the conference. Do you think it ticked the boxes?
Absolutely. And what's great about our network is that people come very willingly and with a lot of energy. And the conference shows that. The discussions also enforce that. And I think our social services within the Catholic Church in Australia are probably more cohesive than people believe, doing great work. And if we could get our act together a little bit better in terms of promoting all of that and pushing that along, Frank Brennan does a great job in Catholic Social Services.
He's a great person to have as the chair.
Fantastic.
Yes.
We're making really good progress at the moment.
Oh, Peter, that's very optimistic sort
It
of
is, but we have
way
to be. We have to be
finish.
because that's the way to attack things. Not to sit back and say it's too hard. We have to use the energy of conferences like this to go forward right around the country.
Fantastic. And Chris, under that Hearing, Healing, Hope banner, some final thoughts from yourself?
More of the same. We need to keep going. I think just agreeing with Peter. The importance of this issue to the Australian society as a whole is huge. The Church's contribution in this area to date has been massive, and we think there's a lot more that we can do.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks. Lovely to have you in beautiful Melbourne.
Yeah,
and Peter, you also. Peter Selwood, Chris Hall, as part of a conference that has really been given plenty of ticks. Hearing, Healing, Hope on behalf of Catholic Social Services Australia. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.